Well, I think I sort of indicated what I thought about that question. It's a philosophical and conceptual problem. It's not really a religious problem. I think for people who have piety and faith, the presence of God is self-evident. They don't talk about the existence of God. They talk about the presence of God. The existence of God is a complicated issue. It's never been, you can't be proven. You're only convinced by the proofs if you already believe in it. And if you're not a believer, you can't be convinced by the proofs. Which means ultimately that it's not an interesting problem. You know, to me it's not. Especially when you know that there are people in the world for whom the presence of God is quite real. And that's what is religion. Is the study of people who invoke and sustain and carry with them the presence of God through these ritual, all this business that we've been talking about. I used to be in philosophy of religion. That's where I started as a student of religion, and I read a lot of philosophy of religion. And there's the famous parable of the gardener, which appears in a lot of philosophy textbooks. I'm convinced that there's a gardener taking care of this plot. But look, I stake out the area, and nobody's watering the garden, nobody's mowing the lawn. It's getting eaten up and chewed up, but I insist that there's a gardener. Well, the world is like it's like that, you know. You can insist that there's a God, despite all the contrary evidence, or you can be not interested in the problem and say there isn't one, and I got a lot of evidence to support it. Or, like most religious people, you look at all the evidence and you're still convinced that there is a God, not because of the arguments, but because your experience is of a certain kind that God's presence and nearness is palpable to you. And that's a matter of how you interpret your life, which gets back to the notion of miracles. So I think the reality of God is really bound up with the way people interpret their life situation in light of the symbols that they have available to them and the traditions they're exposed to. People do interpret their lives as being taken care of by divine love and attention. For such an individual, all the demonstrations of the shoddiness of the proofs for God's existence are not very interesting or worth bearing in mind. Does that make them irrational? Well, not really. I'm not convinced that religious people are irrational. They're simply not interested in unsolvable metaphysical problems, which threaten to upset the very thing that's most precious to them, which is their sensibility of being protected, or of knowing that disasters which befall them have a meaning and a purpose.